Everyone, it's Jenna Lemire again, and we are in for some more Nonviolent Communication, a Language of Life. I have the second edition by Marshall B. Rosenberg, PhD. Been reading this for a book club that I'm in, and basically we're reading just a couple chapters at a time. We meet a couple times per month, and then in this Discord group that we're in, we will, practice some of the stuff that's also in a workbook that one of the other people has, or a couple of the other people have. So today we're going to be going over chapter 9, and I think if I have enough energy, I'll probably do 10, but I'll separate it. So I'm glad you're here, and here we go. Chapter 9 is connecting compassionately with ourselves. And there's a Gandhi quote that says, "Let us become the change we seek in the world." I so resonate with that. We have seen how NVC contributes to relationships with friends and family, at work, and in the political arena. Its most crucial application, however, may be in the way that we treat ourselves. When we are internally violent toward ourselves, it is difficult to be genuinely compassionate toward others. And I would say that I believe that the inner dialogue and relationship that we cultivate is a direct reflection of the people, places, faces, all names, all the stuff that happens externally. And I think that sometimes it's hard to make that link because we don't really realize how much our thoughts are from programming and our fear thoughts that we've taken on, like before the age of 8, and so it's just like we don't recognize how mean we are to ourselves sometimes, and so I think that this external triggerable world is there triggering us for us, so that we can see, like, oh, if they're doing that reflection, what might I be saying up here? Or what was I buying that someone else told me that was really distorted that I'm still chewing on? Anyway, that's just my own thoughts. In the side note here, it says the most important use of NVC may be in developing self-compassion. Boy, I totally agree. Remembering the specialness of what we are. In the play, A Thousand Clowns by Herb Gardner, the protagonist refuses to release his 12-year-old nephew to child welfare authorities, declaring, "I want him to get to know exactly the special thing that he is, or else he won't notice it when it starts to go. I want him to stay awake and see all the wild possibilities. I want him to know it's worth all the trouble just to give the world a little goosing when you get a chance. And I want him to know the subtle, sneaky, important reason why he was born a human being and not a chair." That's an interesting quote. Or excerpt, whatever. "I am gravely concerned that many of us have lost awareness of the special thing we are. We've forgotten the subtle, sneaky, important reason the uncle so passionately wanted his nephew to know. When critical self-concepts prevent us from seeing the beauty in ourselves, we lose connection with the divine energy that is our source. Conditioned to view ourselves as objects full of shortcomings. Is it any wonder that many of us end up relating violently to ourselves? No. An important area where this violence can be replaced with compassion is in our moment-to-moment evaluation of ourselves. Since we want whatever we do to lead to an enrichment of life, it is critical to know how to evaluate events and conditions in ways that help us learn and make ongoing choices that serve us. Unfortunately, the way that we've been trained to evaluate ourselves often promotes more self-hatred than learning." And the side thing here says, "We use NVC to evaluate ourselves in ways that engender growth rather than self-hatred." Sounds good to me. Evaluating ourselves when we've been less than perfect. In a routine workshop activity, I asked participants to recall a recent occasion where they did something that they wish they hadn't. We then look at how they spoke to themselves immediately after having made what is referred in common language as a mistake or error. Typical statements were, "Oh, that was dumb. How could you do such a stupid thing? What's wrong with you? You're always messing up. That's selfish." These speakers have been taught to judge themselves in ways that imply that what they did was wrong or bad. Their self-admonishment implicitly assumes that they deserve to suffer for what they've done. It is tragic that so many of us get enmeshed in self-hatred rather than belief or benefit from mistakes which show us our limitations and guide us toward growth. Even when we sometimes do learn a lesson from mistakes for which we judge ourselves harshly, I worry that the nature of the energy behind that kind of change in learning. I worry about the nature of the energy behind that kind of change in learning. I'd like change to be stimulated by a clear desire to enrich life for ourselves or for others, rather than by destructive energies such as shame or guilt. If the way we evaluate ourselves leads us to feel shame and what consequently change our behavior, we are allowing our growing and learning to be guided by self-hatred. Shame is a form of self-hatred, and actions taken in reaction to shame are not free and joyful acts. Even if our intention is to behave with more kindness and sensitivity, if people sense shame or guilt behind our actions, they are less likely to appreciate what we do than if we're motivated purely by the human desire to contribute to life. Isn't that truth for my empaths out there? Don't you feel when somebody's doing something out of guilt or shame versus joy or just pure in their heart? That is the thing. Like, fear is a huge motivator. I feel like fear is a motivator, and genuine like excitement, flow, that kind of thing. So, that's the benefit to fear, is that from a place of despondence or apathy, that kind of thing is just stagnant, non-moving, decaying. Whereas the energy of anger or fear and anger get people to move from that place and kind of starts a momentum going. Granted, the momentum tends to be in that direction for a while, but it does feel like it's a vibrational increase from stagnation and apathy. Okay, let's see. Where was I? Even if our intention is to behave with more kindness and sensitivity, if people sense shame or guilt behind our actions, they're less likely to appreciate what we do than if we are motivated purely by the human desire to contribute to life. In our language, there is a word with enormous power to create shame and guilt. This violent word, which we commonly use to evaluate ourselves, is so deeply ingrained in our consciousness that many of us would have trouble imagining how to live without it. It is the word should. As in, I should have known better, or I shouldn't have done that. I'm just laughing right now because I have a shadow work process checklist kind of thing that I use. And one of them is checking the past situation that's coming back to kind of bite us on the ass. If we see a pattern, right, that one of the steps in there to look for in the pattern is where our mindset is stuck on how this event in time has a should or shouldn't. Oh, they should have done this, but they didn't, or they shouldn't do that, but they did. So what we're doing is we're taking the event, we're like pushing on it with resistance. And since it's already happened, there is nothing more we can do about it, but then to see it through a clearer eyes. And if we are like, they should have done this, and there's a in it, that means that our human conditioned self feels differently about it than our highest, most authentic, functioning adult healed version. That's why we have why we feel something. So oftentimes when we see those patterns and then we go back and find, oh, I was totally still viewing this as if they should have done something differently. And the best exercise for this kind of stuff, I think, is the Byron Katie process, because she does this thing in it where there's a lot of turnarounds so that you're able to see, like, you're able to question it as if like, she shouldn't have done this. Is it true? Is it really true that she shouldn't have done that? And so just by pondering it, the next question in the inquiry from Byron Katie is, do we know with 100% certainty that this shouldn't have happened? And so when we put ourselves in that place, it's kind of like we get to add in more contemplation. And like, the way Byron Katie does it too is it'll be like, someone will be like, oh, well, she's a parent. She shouldn't have been an alcoholic, or she shouldn't have whatever. And it's like, well, if somebody is having a problem with something, then she should drink if she's an alcoholic. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not saying, it's not having anything to do with the impact of somebody's behavior. That's a whole nother thing, right? But as far as like the mentality of like, what did somebody really expect? If somebody's suffering, their behavior is going to match that. And so sometimes just recognizing, oh, they couldn't from where they were, it doesn't mean we like the behavior that they have, or we didn't feel an impact from our impression of it. It just means looking back in time, if we're holding us, she should have been a different kind of mom and she wasn't, that's only going to rip you up inside. You know what I mean? So the more that we can just be like, okay, of course, somebody with this issue would for sure be doing those things. They can't not if they're stuck in that programming. That's what the programming gives us. So I don't know, that might be a controversial way of looking at it. You're welcome to have your own thoughts on it, but this I've seen has been really super helpful for me. And again, just need to mention, we're not talking about like that it's awesome behavior or that there's no impact from some of those things. It just means sitting there and looking back at time, every time you think of a certain person because of something that already happened is only going to poison yourself. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Should, as in I should have known better, or I shouldn't have done that. Most of the time when we use this word with ourselves, we resist learning because should implies that there is no choice. Human beings, when hearing any kind of demand, tend to resist because it threatens our autonomy, our strong need for choice. We have this reaction to tyranny, even when it's internal tyranny in the form of a should. Oh my God, and I have to just do a side note too, because I've been learning more about autism, ADHD, and the particular ways in which my brain works. And the profile of autism that I have is classified as PDA, which is persistent drive for autonomy. It has 2 words, and pathological demand avoidance. And I noticed that it's really strong in a lot of neurodivergent people too, in that my brother would do this all the time. He's also autistic, but in a very different style of how his brain is than mine. But anyway, he would oftentimes say things like, hey, you should watch this movie that I saw. And it would be like a really exciting movie. He had all the best intentions. He was trying to connect and relate to me when he would call me the next day, but it was just the way he delivered it. If he said, you should watch this movie, there was something about in my development that like needed to come do it myself, or like it's just repulsed by when somebody tells me what I should or shouldn't do. Oh my God. And it's like, so yeah, the book is so right. It's like, it can be the best thing ever. Oh my God, you should invest your $1 million in this because it's a guaranteed thing. It's like, it can be the best thing ever, but for some reason that should in there just like is cringy. So it's interesting. Okay. A similar expression of internal demand occurs in the following self-evaluation. What I'm doing is just terrible. I really must do something about it. Think for a moment of all the people you've heard say, I really should give up smoking, or I really have to do something about exercising more. They keep saying what they must do, and then they keep resisting doing it because human beings were not meant to be slaves. We're not meant to succumb to the dictates of should or have to, whether they come from outside or inside of ourselves. I love this. I think this is so important, to be able to reframe the things in your mind anytime you can, by changing it or recognizing where there's a choice. Recognizing where there's a choice in this is so important. And then being able to, like, instead of saying I have to go to work, realize you don't ever, like, yes, if you didn't go, you could lose your job or there could be like consequences. I'm not saying that, but you absolutely could just never go to work. You could just sit on the couch. You can poop and pee in your couch. And yes, you could like maybe lose your out. There's lots of things that can happen with that, but it's still a choice. And if we don't see that choice, we're going to feel like slaves. We're going to feel powerless. So the more that we recognize this is a job that I've chosen to take on. And within that job, what are the things that I like to do? And the more that we can just change, I get to go to work instead of I have to go to work. Oh my God, that has just like made the huge difference for me and a lot of my clients. So I like that topic. A similar expression. Oh, they already said that. We were not meant to succumb. I already said that. And if we do yield and submit to these demands, our actions arise from an energy that is devoid of life-giving joy. Truth. Translating self-judgments and inner demands. When we communicate with ourselves on a regular basis through inner judgment, blame, and demand, it's not surprising that I just have to say that if we're self-judging, blaming, and demanding, what are we going to see on the external? We're going to see people that are judging us, blaming us, and placing demands on us because it's all reflecting inner dialogue. Okay. So when we communicate with ourselves on a regular basis through judgment, blame, and demand, it's not surprising that our self-concept gives in to feeling more like a chair than a human being. A basic premise of NVC is that whenever we imply that someone is wrong or bad, what we're really saying is that he or she is not acting in harmony with our needs. Yeah. If the person, which is good too, by recognizing that, because then it'll take you right to what your need is. And then as soon as you know your need is, you can ask yourself, how can I meet this need for myself? Or you can then recognize that it then is a choice. And if you can't meet your own need, that it is not something that somebody else has to do, it becomes a choice for them too. And then when you offer it as instead of a demand to someone else, and just a recognition that, hey, I can't do this, but it is a need of mine. And you're coming from you don't have to do this for me. I recognize, then it's like makes it a choice for someone. And then they're more apt to actually do something for you than if it comes off as a demand. And especially if it's a needy demand that is seeming like you're having to, like, I have this need, so everyone in the world has to fulfill it. That's a very demanding thing. And it makes other people feel like they don't have free will and not want to help you, or to help you kind of in spite. And that's what I've noticed, at least. Okay. I myself am not, let's see. I'll just repeat it. A basic premise of NVC is that whenever we imply someone is wrong or bad, we're really saying is that he or she is not acting in harmony with our needs. If the person we're judging happens to be ourselves, what we are saying is, I myself am not behaving in harmony with my own needs. I'm convinced that if we learn to evaluate ourselves in terms of whether and how well our needs are being fulfilled, we are much more likely to learn from the evaluation. Our challenge then, when we are doing something that is not enriching life, is to evaluate ourselves moment by moment in a way that inspires change in both, one, in the direction of where we would like to go, and two, out of respect and compassion for ourselves rather than out of self-hatred, guilt, or shame. NVC mourning, M-O-U-R, mourning. After a lifetime of schooling and socialization, it's probably too late for most of us to train our minds to think purely in terms of what we need and value from moment to moment. However, just as we have learned to translate judgments when conversing with others, we can train ourselves to recognize judgmental self-talk and to immediately focus our attention on the underlying needs. For example, if we find ourselves reacting reproachfully to something we did, look, you just messed up again. We can quickly stop and ask ourselves, what unmet need of mine is being expressed through this moralistic judgment? When we do connect to the need, and there may be several layers of needs, we will notice a remarkable shift in our bodies. Instead of the shame, guilt, or depression we likely feel when criticizing ourselves for having messed up again, we will experience any number of feelings, whether it's sadness, frustration, disappointment, fear, grief, or some other feeling. We have been endowed by nature with these feelings for purpose. They mobilize us for action in pursuing and fulfilling what we need or value. Their impact on our spiritual and bodies is substantially different from the disconnection that is brought on by guilt, shame, and depression. Mourning in NVC is the process of fully connecting with the unmet needs and feelings that are generated when we have been less than perfect. It is an experience of regret, but a regret that helps us learn from what we have done without blaming or hating ourselves. We see how our behavior ran counter to our own needs and values. We open ourselves to feelings that arise out of that awareness. When our consciousness is focused on what we need, we are naturally stimulated toward the creative possibilities of how to get that need met. In contrast, the moralistic judgments we use when blaming ourselves tend to obscure such possibilities and to perpetuate a state of self-punishment. The little side box says NVC mourning, connecting with the feelings and unmet needs stimulated by past actions, which we now regret. Self-forgiveness. We follow up on the process of mourning with self-forgiveness, turning our attention to the part of the self which chose to act in the way that led us. Also, if you guys have seen the stuff I did, workshop kind of going over some of Brent Charlton's work. He has a really great little box of like whether we're in child self, whether we're in a teen self. There's a lot of insights in the way that his particular program is, and it's bringing up that the aim for any characters we have inside us that are kind of acting out of a teen energy, the doer energy that's acting out of still like guilt and shame and a little more panicky, that energy, he's saying that basically what that energy within us needs to hear is they need to be dethroned. They need to know that they are taking on a lot of adult things, and there's just a teen, they're just a child. Like it could there's a different version of us that can step up to be able to relinquish them from their role. So that's something that you do. But then when you look at your inner child selves, the ones that have been arrested in development, their developmental stage really a lot younger, what those are calling us for is for forgiveness, to be let off the hook of any of the shame or guilt that they've been carrying, and with the recognition, oh my God, this is my energy that is stuck at like 6 months old or 6 years old. And of course, I'm not going to be able to fill in the blank from that level of mentality. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I'm loving how they're just talking about self-forgiveness here. We follow up on the process of mourning with self-forgiveness, turning our attention to the part of the self which chose to act in the way that led to the present situation. We ask ourselves, when I behaved in the way which I now regret, what need of mine was I trying to meet? Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. I want to highlight that. I just like that. When I behaved in the way which I now regret, what need of mine was I trying to meet? I believe that human beings are always acting in the service of needs and values. This is true whether the action does or does not meet the need, or whether it is one that we end up celebrating or regretting. When we listen empathically to ourselves, we'll be able to hear the underlying need. Self-forgiveness occurs the moment this empathic connection is made, when we are able to recognize how our choice was an attempt to serve life, even as the mourning process teaches us how it fell short of fulfilling our needs. An important aspect of self-compassion is to be able to empathically hold both parts of ourselves, the self that regrets a past action and the self that took the action in the first place. The process of mourning and self-forgiveness free us in the direction of learning and growing. In connecting moment by moment to our needs, we increase our creative capacity to act in harmony with them. Yeah, I think that's also a big part of that chart I'm mentioning too, that is that one of the big like things that helps when we're in these stunted kind of places is recognizing where we don't actually know what our needs are, and if there's any fears in the ability to communicate them. So that's a really big thing that in healing to lead someone to is being able to like, hey, let's discover where there is a need here and let's address anything that might be in the way of you feeling actually comfortable to be able to vocalize it. Okay. The lesson of the polka dotted suit. I would like to illustrate the process of mourning and self-forgiveness by recalling a personal event. The day before an important workshop, I had bought a light gray summer suit to wear. At the end of the well-attended workshop, I was swarmed by participants asking for my address, signature, and other information. With time closing in on another appointment, I hastened to attend to the request of the participants, signing and scribbling on the many bits of paper thrust in front of me. As I rushed out the door, I stuck my pen uncapped in the pocket of my new suit. Once outside, I discovered to my horror that instead of the nice light gray suit, I now had a polka dotted suit. For 20 minutes, I was brutal with myself. How could you be so careless? What a stupid thing to do. I just ruined a brand new suit. If ever I needed compassion and understanding, this was the time. Yet here I was responding to myself in a way that left me feeling worse than ever. Fortunately, after 20 minutes, I noticed that I was doing. I stopped. I looked for the need of mine that was unmet by having left the pen uncapped and asked myself, what need lies behind my judging myself as careless and stupid? Immediately, I saw that it was to take better care of myself, to have given more attention to my own needs while I was rushing to address everyone else's needs. As soon as I touched that part of myself and connected to the deep longing to be more aware and caring of my own needs, my feelings shifted. There was a release of tension in my body as the anger, shame, and guilt I was harboring towards myself dissipated. I fully mourned the ruined suit and uncapped pen as I opened to feelings of sadness now arising along with the yearning to take better care of myself. Next, I shifted my attention to the need that I was meeting when I slipped the uncapped pen into my pocket. I recognized how much I valued care and consideration for other people's needs. Of course, in taking such good care of other people's needs, I had not taken the time to do the same for myself. But instead of blame, I felt a wave of compassion for myself as I realized that even in my rushing and putting the pen away unthinkingly, I'd come out of serving my own need to respond to others in a caring way. In that compassionate place, I am able to hold both needs. In one hand, to respond in a caring way to other people's needs, and in the other, to be aware of and to take better care of my own. Being conscious of both needs, I can imagine ways of behaving differently in similar situations and arriving at solutions more resourcefully than if I lose that consciousness in a sea of self-judgment. And the little side thing says, we are compassionate with ourselves when we are able to embrace all parts of ourselves and recognize the needs and values expressed by each part. Don't do anything that isn't play. I like this one. In addition to the process of mourning and self-forgiveness, another aspect of self-compassion I emphasize is the energy behind whatever action we take. When I advise, don't do anything that isn't play, some take me to be radical, even insane. I earnestly believe, however, that an important form of self-compassion is to make choices motivated purely by our desire to contribute to life rather than out of fear, guilt, shame, duty, or obligation. Oh, hallelujah. When we are conscious of the life-enriching purpose behind an action, we take when the soul energy that motivates us is simply to make life wonderful for others and ourselves, then even hard work has an element of play in it. Correspondingly, an otherwise joyful activity performed out of obligation, duty, fear, guilt, or shame will lose its joy and eventually engender resistance. And then the side thing here says, we want to take action out of the desire to contribute to life rather than out of fear, guilt, shame, or obligation. In chapter 2, we considered replacing language that implies lack of choice with language that acknowledges choice. Many years ago, I engaged in an activity which significantly enlarged the pool of joy and happiness available to my life, while diminishing depression, guilt, and shame. I offer it here as a possible way to deepen our compassion for ourselves and to help us live our lives out of joyous play by staying grounded in a clear awareness of the life enriching need behind everything we do. Translating have to choose to. I said that earlier. Step 1. What do you do in your life that you don't experience as playful? List on a piece of paper all those things that you tell yourself that you have to do. Any activity you dread, but do it anyway because you perceive yourself as having no choice. When I first reviewed my own list, just seeing how long it was gave me insight as to why so much of my time was spent in not enjoying life. I noticed how many things in an ordinary day I was doing by tricking myself into believing that I had to do them. This first item on my list was write clinical reports. I hated doing those reports, yet I was spending at least an hour of agony over them every day. My second item was drive the children's carpool to school. Step 2. After completing the list, clearly acknowledge to yourself that you are doing these things because you choose to do them, not because you have to. Insert the words, I choose to, in front of each item that you've listed. I recall my own resistance to this step. Writing clinical reports, I insisted to myself, is not something I choose to do. I have to do it. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have to write these reports. Step 3. After having acknowledged that you choose to do a particular activity, get in touch with the intention behind the choice by completing the statement, I choose to fill in the blank because I want fill in the blank. At first, I fumbled to identify what I wanted from writing clinical reports. Several months earlier, I had already determined that the reports did not serve my clients enough to justify the time that they were taking. So why was I continuing to invest so much energy in their preparation? Finally, I realized that I was choosing to write the reports solely because I wanted the income they provided. As soon as I recognized this, I never wrote another clinical report. I can't tell you how joyful I feel just thinking of how many clinical reports I haven't written since the moment 35 years ago. When I realized that money was my primary motivation, I immediately saw that I could find other ways to take care of myself financially, and that in fact, I'd rather scavenge in garbage cans for food than to write another clinical report. That's why I'm a life coach and not going back to school to be a psychologist. Screw that noise. The next item on my list of unjoyful tasks was driving the children to school. When I examined the reason behind that chore, however, I felt appreciation for the benefits my children received from attending their current school. They could easily walk to the neighborhood school, but their own school was far more in harmony with my educational values. I continued to drive, but with a different energy. Instead of, oh, darn, I have to drive the carpool today, I was conscious of my purpose, which was for my children to have a quality of education that was very dear to me. Of course, I sometimes needed to remind myself 2 or 3 times during the drive to refocus my mind on what purpose my action was serving. And then on the side here, it says, with every choice you make, be conscious of what needs it serves. Cultivating awareness of the energy behind our actions. As you explore the statements, I choose to blank because I want to blank, you may discover, as I did with the children's carpool, the important values behind the choices that you've made. I am convinced that after we gain clarity regarding the need being served by our actions, we can experience them as play even when they involve hard work, challenge, or frustration. For some items on your list, however, you might uncover one or several of the following motivations. 1, for money. Money is a major form of extrinsic reward in our society. Choices prompted by a desire for reward are costly. They deprive us of the joy in life that comes with actions grounded in the clear intention to contribute to a human need. Money is not a need as we define it in NVC. It is one of the countless strategies that may be selected to address a need. 2, for approval. Like money, approval from others is a form of extrinsic reward. Our culture has educated us to hunger for reward. We attended schools that used extrinsic means to motivate us to study. We grew up in homes where we were rewarded for being good little boys and girls and punished when our caretakers judged us to be otherwise. Thus, As adults, we easily trick ourselves into believing that life consists of doing things for reward. We are addicted to getting a smile, a pat on the back, of people's verbal judgments that we are a good person, good parent, good citizen, good worker, good friend, good cousin, whatever. We do things to get people to like us and avoid things that may lead them to dislike or punish us. I find it tragic that we work so hard to buy love and assume that we must deny ourselves and do for others in order to be liked. In fact, when we do these things solely in the spirit of enhancing life, we will find others appreciating us. Their appreciation, however, is only a feedback mechanism confirming that our efforts had the intended effect. The recognition that we have chosen to use our power to serve life and have done so successfully brings us the genuine joy of celebrating ourselves in a way that approval from others can never offer. Number 3 is to escape punishment. Some of us pay income tax primarily to avoid punishment. As a consequence, we are likely to approach that yearly ritual with a degree of resentment. I recall, however, in my childhood, how differently my father and grandfather felt about paying taxes. They had immigrated from Russia to the United States, and they were desirous of supporting a government they believed were protecting people in a way that the Tsar had not. Imagining that many people whose welfare was being served by their tax money, they felt earnest pleasure as they sent their checks to the US government. Number 4 is to avoid shame. There may be some tasks we choose to do to avoid shame. We know that if we don't do them, we'll end up suffering severe self-judgment, hearing our own voice telling us how there is something wrong or stupid about us. If we do something stimulated solely by the urge to avoid shame, we will generally end up detesting it. To avoid guilt. In other instances, we may think, if I don't do this, people will be disappointed in me. We're afraid we'll end up feeling guilty for failing to fulfill other people's expectations of us. There is a world of difference between doing something for others in order to avoid guilt and doing it out of clear awareness of our own need to contribute to the happiness of other human beings. The first is a world filled with misery, and the second is a world filled with play. 6, we do things out of duty. When we use language which denies choice, example, words such as should, have to, ought to, must, can't, supposed to, etc., our behaviors arise out of a vague sense of guilt, duty, or obligation. I consider this to be the most socially dangerous and personally unfortunate of all of the ways we act when we're cut off from our needs. In chapter 2, we saw how the concept of AMSPRACHE, I don't know how to say this, AMTSSPRACHE, allowed Adolf Eichmann and his colleagues to send tens of thousands of people to their deaths without feeling emotionally affected or personally responsible. When we speak a language that denies choice, we forfeit the life in ourselves for a robot-like mentality that disconnects us from our own core. And the side note here says, the most dangerous of all behaviors may consist of doing things because we're supposed to. Yeah. It can be ordered to do stuff that's so against our needs and values and the needs and values of other people because of the threat of harm or guilt or ostracization or, oh, it's terrible. After examining the list of items you have generated, you may decide to stop doing certain things in the same spirit that I chose to forego clinical reports. As radical as it may seem, it is possible to do things only out of play. I believe that to the degree that we engage moment by moment in the playfulness of enriching life, motivated solely by the desire for its enrichment, to that degree we are being compassionate with ourselves. Summary. The most crucial application of NVC may be in the way that we treat ourselves. When we make mistakes, we can use the process of NVC mourning and self-forgiveness to show us where we can grow instead of getting caught up in moralistic self-judgments. By assessing our behaviors in terms of our own unmet needs, the impetus for change comes not out of shame, guilt, anger, or depression, but out of the genuine desire to contribute to our own and others' well-being. We also cultivate self-compassion by consciously choosing in daily life to act only in service to our own needs and values rather than out of duty for extrinsic rewards. or to avoid guilt, shame, and punishment. If we review the joyless acts to which we currently subject ourselves and make the transition from have to choose to, we will discover more play and integrity in our lives. Nice. Yeah. So if I were just to recap this one, I just learned the most about the shouldn'ts, the self-talk, and just how many things in my life I will want to make a list on and start linking it more to an unmet need in myself, seeing it more through the filters of what I value, and start then really infusing the free will choice into things, or examining what things I can fully let go of, or seeing if I can twist any of the things I have been doing into more play. That's kind of what I got out of that. How about you? Share with me in the comments, and like and push a bell and subscribe and give me your firstborn and PayPal me. Blah. Okay, oh God, I hate that. By the way, I hate that. I hate having to do stuff like that. Follow me if you want to. Period. Okay, chapter 10 to come. Love you all. Bye.